I think almost all of you have, I'm sure, heard of Cursor. Aman and his 3 co-founders, so there are 4 co-founders in the company. He's going to talk more about that. They started the company, or what became the company, while they were at MIT. All 4 of them graduated from MIT in 2022. He's going to talk about the origin story and how they got started. Aman's been coding since he was 14. I met him in 2019 in New York at his home. He had just done an internship at Google, and he was dead bored. So I can see why you started Cursor. Cursor today has 30 people. Product launched in 2023. It's just cost $100 million of revenue. So it's been a pretty fast-growing company. Basically, Cursor is an AI code editor. He'll talk a little bit more about that. But as all of you know, coding is a space that's going to get disrupted or is being disrupted by AI, and is a very, very competitive space. Let's start with your origin story. How did the 4 of you get going? Like, tell us a little bit about the backstory.
Yeah, all of us had met at MIT, and all of us had a bit of background in machine learning, and we were all early users of Copilot. So Copilot, GitHub Copilot came out around 2021, that summer, and it was really amazing. It felt magical when it came out. This was the first language model-based product that actually worked. All of the kind of machine learning systems that have been built before and productionized mainly looked like recommendation systems, maybe some things in the early innings of computer vision for self-driving. But Copilot was really the first language model product. And you kind of felt that magic when you first used it. But it was a year later, and nothing had changed. The models themselves were starting to get better. If you kind of looked at the research.
The product itself hasn't changed?
A year later, the only thing that had changed is they swapped out a new model that OpenAI gave them. It was the same exact thing otherwise, and the experience felt more or less the same. But the underlying models were getting better. And like I was saying, if you kind of looked at what was going on in the literature, people were scaling up these models on much more data. And given the vast quantities of data that existed for code, we expected that the models were just going to get much, much better. And it just didn't seem like the future of coding was going to be better ghost text, better autocomplete. If language models were really going to get good enough that they were going to produce 95% of software, our thesis was that you had to reimagine the interface by which engineers actually build software. There are a few kind of anecdotes that help fuel this. So we kind of met Nat Friedman, and he was the CEO of GitHub. He was partially responsible for helping create GitHub Copilot. And basically, Microsoft owned VS Code and GitHub. And one of the core reasons that Copilot worked is because they're able to make this change to VS Code where you have this kind of new UX of that great text. For everyone who kind of knows what I'm talking about, maybe if you don't code, you've seen this in Gmail. There's this kind of gray text that shows up for autocomplete. And that didn't exist before. It was this kind of weird IntelliSense bubble that things like Tab 9 tried to use. And just swapping that out made a massive difference in the usefulness. And so again, going back, if the models are going to get better, going to be able to do more and more things, we thought you needed to own the IDE. And I think that's proven to be, I think it's proven to be the correct choice.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and you guys have reimagined the whole thing. A lot of founders think a lot about it. These are all becoming very competitive spaces, right? We're competing with the models. You're competing with lots of other companies. Did you guys even think about this journey you were embarking on, which is to take on Microsoft, or it's like?
Yeah, no, we 100% thought about that, and that was the biggest thing holding us back from working on the space, because we were really obsessed with training language models and making them better at code, but we kept on hesitating. We thought, maybe we should build other kinds of developer tools.
You didn't start with Cursor, right? Talk a little bit about what you guys started with.
Yeah, we started out actually building tools for mechanical engineers. So seeing the success of Copilot, for example, we thought, had a bit of background in robotics, and a lot of mechanical engineering is incredibly tedious. Can you build an autocomplete-like model for CAD? But at the end of the day, there wasn't really founder market fit. We weren't really mechanical engineers, and we kept on coming back to code. And yeah, I think like ultimately coding was a much more crowded market, but I think we had this thesis that you needed to own the interface, you needed to own the IDE, and that gave us this edge compared to, there are tens of other really, really well-funded startups and like GitHub Copilot that existed. But focusing on the UX to start out with gave us that edge, I think.
Got it. Okay, now let's focus on the, I was going to say early days, but yours, like literally 2-year-old company. So tell us about what happened in the first year. I think you had 5 people in the whole company, right? Like up until, I can't remember, like maybe a year ago or something?
Yeah. So it was mainly just the founders, and it was 4 of us.
So with the 4 of you, you built the product, you shipped the product.
Yeah, so I think we started working on we started working on the IDE around January 2023. And it was about 2, 3, 4 months of really experimenting, trying different things, and then finding something that fit. And then we shipped it, and it had an okay launch. We shipped it alongside GPT-4, so there was some initial buzz at the very start because it was one of the first few products that had GPT-4 in it, but then it died down, usage tanked. And then the entirety of that summer was just incredibly slow growth. And I mean, that was somewhat demoralizing. The big question in our minds was, are we being too ambitious here? Like, are we trying to build this general purpose thing for all engineers as this really small team? Maybe we should be focusing more narrowly on, some particular use case, like tests or bug detection, things like that. But the really magical thing about this product was that we were users of it. So we could iterate incredibly quickly, and we tried all these different things that summer. And then we found this kind of core set of features that really, really worked incredibly well. One of them was this instructed edit ability, and we kind of nailed the UX for that, and it's called Command K in Cursor, because that is the actual command you invoke. And the other was code-based indexing, where you can ask questions about your whole code base. And then kind of after we integrated those 2 features and we launched them, growth kind of just took off.
So it was really those two features that you added?
I think so. We had a bunch of other things that we tried to experiment around. And a lot of the work of Cursor has been just like experimenting with what is possible. Like for everything that you guys may see in the product, there's like 10 failed experiments of what didn't work. Like a great example of this is my personal favorite feature, which is now called Cursor Tab. The original name of it was Copilot++. So Copilot, at least at the time, just was autocomplete. And the idea with Copilot++ is most of coding is not just figuring what comes next after your cursor. It is edits, right? It is making changes to existing code. So Copilot++ was originally designed as something that predicts your next edit. But it wasn't actually like a replacement for Copilot. It was something that's meant to be used on top of it. Copilot does your autocomplete. Copilot++ does your edits. And we experimented with this like over the summer using prompted models, completely failed. And the thing that made it work was around January of 2024, we now had enough users that we had some user data. And we can
How many users did you have by January 24? So about a year after you launched?
I think we had 30,000, I want to say, daily active users, give or take. Yeah. And, with these users, we now had some data, and we could use this to train models to predict your next edit. And that's like one example of we tried. There were 2 other attempts in the past where we tried to get this to work, and it just completely failed. And then finally, we made it work that 3rd time. And it wasn't even like full autocomplete. It was just this thing you add up on top of Copilot. And then over time, we slowly improved it. And now I think it's substantially better than Copilot at both autocomplete and this thing of predicting your next edit.
Got it. So let's maybe, I think the four of you are the users of the product. You're also very technical. And you guys keep experimenting, building stuff that you want as users, right?
Yeah, I think that's...
Like, talk to us a little bit about, just bring that to life for the group, because I think the speed at which you guys are doing this is quite crazy.
Yeah, I think that was probably one of the big edges for us, which is like, we were this small team. And like, everyone that's in this space is effectively building for themselves because it's engineers. But I don't think anyone really was as true to that as we were. Where like all of our work was literally for the first 6 months to a year trying to find these new ways of harnessing these models, of making these models better for programming. Yeah, my favorite experiment, which still like haven't nailed it yet today, but I think is starting to see signs of life, and we try this so many times, is like you should be able to use these models to detect bugs. It's unclear if that lives as something that's happening as you're typing, like a linter. It's unclear if that lives as something that happens during review. But we tried so many different variants of this. And finally now we have something where I think, sometimes it actually requires a ton of resources and a ton of, compute and a large team to invest into making something like one of these features work. And I think that was the case for this bug finding thing. But yeah, it's just like a ton of trying out things, seeing what sticks, and then releasing it to the world. And we release these like half-finished things, which a lot of our competitors kind of refuse to do. And then the first version of Copilot++ Cursor Tab sucked, but then once you release it to the world, see how people react to it, you can improve it a ton.
So you're okay to release a lot and then cut most and keep the ones that work?
Yeah. I think we've biased towards releasing as soon as something shows signs of usefulness to the team.
Got it. Let's now go to the team building, right? Mm-hmm. So when did you add your first non-co-founder, 4 co-founders, like the 5th team member, or the first non-co-founder team? Who was it, and when did you... Just tell us a little bit about how you built the team.
Yeah, so we've hired very slowly. And I think we got away with this for a while because it was a team of 4 technical co-founders. So we could build most of the early product, get to some early version of PMF without needing to hire anyone. And I think that's actually great because it meant, as first-time founders without a significant network, we didn't have to really lower the bar as much as one might have to do when making a first hire. And so that meant by the time we were looking for kind of the first hire, we were at a stage where, we had some revenue, a pretty decent amount of growth, and we actually had a lot of users that we could go to. So our first hire was kind of a mutual friend, or it was a friend of
MIT grad?
Yeah, MIT, yeah.
So out of the 30, how many people are from MIT?
Oh yeah, like half probably.
Only half, okay.
Yeah.
Where are the others from?
Just a mix of schools. So yeah, this kind of goes to one magical thing about the product is our users are great people to recruit.
Yeah, right.
And so this is how we actually got our second hire.
So power user who kept sending you feedback on experiments that they were running on it?
Yeah, we basically had some way of determining the quality of some super active users' code via analytics. And then we used that to outbound a few of the high-quality users, and then this person responded, and it worked out phenomenally. This person has been an excellent engineer.
Let's now maybe shift gears a little bit. Talk to us a little bit about what's the underlying model architecture for Cursor. I know you guys use frontier models, but you also train your own models.
Yeah. I think it's really important to be pragmatic when building these products. I think a lot of companies in maybe 2023 and 2024 raised a lot of money and spent it all on GPUs before product market fit. And I don't think that is the right move. I think we try to use the best tool for the job. And a lot of the time, that's going to be just calling an API. But as you as you build a large enough team, you build enough expertise, you have enough kind of data that you can use to improve these models, we've started to find that building custom models is more and more impactful. And so this is what we do for Cursor Tab, like the kind of next edit prediction autocomplete.
So you have your own models for that?
That's a completely custom model that we've trained.
How many custom models? Just tell us a little bit. I mean, whatever you can share. How many custom models do you have?
I mean, there's like all these like technically it's like 50, but the ones that are actually served, it's probably like 10 to
10 custom models, and then on the frontier use a bunch of them, or just?
On the frontier, we mainly stick to, I think, Sonnet is the main one, and then some people prefer a few other models, like the reasoning ones, like O3 or O1, and then some people really like R1, like DeepSeek's model. But yeah, going back, we use custom models for mainly low latency things. So areas where you need much lower latency and lower costs than what the labs can provide. Areas where we have a lot of data that is maybe out of distribution of like what these labs kind of get in pre-training. And next edit prediction is a great example of that. What you have if you're looking to pre-train these models is you have all this data on GitHub, but you don't have what happens between the commits. And that we found to be a really excellent source of data. And then things they're not really that interested in improving. Like we can train much better embedding models just because the best people at the labs are working on pushing the frontier of reasoning, not necessarily embedding models. Stuff like that.
And how much of the magic of Cursor is the custom models?
I think a really underrated amount. I think a lot of the stuff you see on Twitter is people kind of raving about, like the 0 to 1 stuff, which, a lot of the time you can get away with mostly just using these models off the shelf. But the magic is when you use it in a larger code base and it like really does a good job of kind of understanding things, of predicting the next thing you're going to do, of like finding the right pieces of code. And like those all come from these custom models.
Got it. And maybe now shifting to a non-Cursor related question, what advice would you guys have, what do you have, Aman, for our founders who are building sort of native AI companies, either agentic or AI applications? Sorry, before I get to that, what is Cursor's moat? You guys think much about moats or not really?
Yeah, I think there are ways to build in stickiness. Like I think distribution, like I don't think there's like these real long-term moats that we've built right now. We have these advantages. Like we have this distribution advantage relative to everyone else except for Copilot. I think there's data advantages. They're not moats yet because, again, Copilot has more users. I think in the long term, there will be a few potential moats. Like I think it's a question of we want to get to scale where we become the incumbent, we overtake Copilot.
So it'll be distribution and data?
I think distribution and data, and then you need to build stickiness because Copilot did not do this, right? Their product is not sticky, which is why we exist, which is why we're able to scale to such a high amount of revenue and hopefully overtake them this year. And I think there are ways of building stickiness that.
How will you just double click on that? How will you build stickiness?
I think there's lots of things you can do to specialize models on code bases, especially if you have developers using, like you have thousands of developers at some big company using the product every single day, and you have kind of all the edits they make. Like that is this rich data. You're not going to use it to improve your other models, sure, for like other people because enterprises won't let you do that, but you can use it to improve the models for them, right? And so you basically get this thing where the more a company uses Cursor, the better Cursor can get. And I don't think it makes sense for us to focus on this right now because growth is much more of a priority than stickiness. But I think it's certainly something we can do.
Stepping beyond Cursor, any advice you would have for our founders who are building sort of either application AI or agentic AI companies? Especially around this, how do you build something that's truly special that either the frontier models can't do it because everybody's going to go into applications?
Yeah, I think you want to shoot for things that are pretty high ceiling. I think it's dangerous to do something.
What do you mean by that? Well, what's pretty high ceiling?
Yeah, like I don't want to put down. I'll just say a good example of this may be like writing copy, right? So maybe there's a product that scaled really fast in revenue that was really good at writing copy, but then that's not super high ceiling. It's not super out of scope for like a chat.
Level of difficulty, is that like, what do you mean?
Yeah, it's like level of difficulty. It's like how close is it to what like a chat GPT or whatever will be able to do. And I think like, what happens there is like ChatGPT comes out and then most people can just go there and have it write copy. I think for coding, it's going to look a little different, where I think everyone's like, the labs maybe will try to build these agents, these software engineering agents, but I think for a very long time, you're still going to need real engineers. And I think for a long time, like engineers paired with these tools are going to be much more productive than these kind of AI coworkers. And yeah, it's the kind of thing that is really high ceiling because there's like, we still actually have so much to go before we're at a level where these models or where these systems using these models can actually replace the best engineers.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's a great way to look at it, actually. All right, let's come to monetization. So like from the day you got your first dollar of revenue to $100 million of revenue, annualized ARR or run rate. So tell us like how did that happen? Like what you guys do? You don't have any salespeople, right?
We set up a Stripe and then
you set up a Stripe,
people pay. Yeah.
And it just boom.
I mean, it didn't feel.
You don't have any salespeople, right?
We started hiring
inbound,
salespeople,
outbound, SDRs, BDRs, A's, none of that, right?
No, we started hiring salespeople a month or two ago. Yeah.
How many salespeople do you have now?
3.
3, okay. But before, when you got to 100 million, you didn't have any.
No. How did it happen? I mean, again, it's just like the story of people tell their friends about these products. It's interesting because developer tools traditionally, like the thing that everyone told us is developer tools don't make money. And yet a bunch of individual developers have paid for this. And yes, I think there's a lot more money in enterprise, and that's the direction that this is all going.
But this is all the revenue is just developers?
It's a mix of developers and teams, yeah. But a lot of it is like individual developers paying. That was at least like the big base for a lot of our growth. I think AI kind of got people willing to pay for things, right? It like kind of like they now have this new, like once you had ChatGPT, people were paying $20 a month. They're now like, okay, it's the norm to pay for some AI tool.
Yeah, that's a great point, right? That probably created the...
Same thing with Copilot, right? Copilot had to go through this process. Like they had to go through like the slog of, for however many years is around, like getting people to change their mind and like think, okay, like I have to pay for an AI tool. And then like that became kind of the norm when we started. So then people were way more willing to pay for a Copilot replacement or a ChatGPT replacement or something that was like much better than that, but the same price.
And what's the, as you think about the next 3-4 years, now I'm moving away from monetization, but including monetization, as you look at the next 3-4 years, I mean, where are you guys trying to go as a company? As a product, as a company?
I think there's a lot more to do to make software engineers much more productive. And like the ultimate goal for Cursor is to make it much easier for anyone in the world to produce software. And if you want it to be incredibly simple for anyone to be able to produce something at the level of sophistication as, let's say, a Figma, I think that's going to take a really long time. And I don't think it's going to look like one thing one belief that I've started to form is coworkers, like AI colleagues, are maybe not the best like final state of the world. Because I have real colleagues and they're excellent engineers. But there is this kind of overhead you get when trying to communicate ideas to them. And then,
because they have emotions,
yeah,
they sleep.
But it's also like, there's like stuff that like lives in your head that's often hard to communicate. And then like there's some like implicit stuff that like you never are able to fully kind of write down or communicate to them. And then they come back with something and it's mostly there, but it's like off a little bit from what you had in your mind's eye. And then there's like some back and forth, right? And I think you can do better than colleagues. I think if you have something that's like close to instant and can iterate with you like instantly, I think a lot of development is going to look like that. And like, I don't know, let's like look at some example piece of software. Like let's take like Notion. a lot of the time, like what matters is like the taste and how you design like everything around Notion. Like what happens when you click on this thing? How does this thing react? And like describing that in enough detail is programming. I think it's just going to look very different.
Just building on that, I know you guys have the four of you have a strong view that, the role of developers is not going to go away. They're going to change, right? Like, because there is a school of thought that says everything goes to no code. I go from prompt to code.
I think there will be some things that go from prompt to code. I think there's some things where it's like super well defined, like models will kind of know what you mean. And like, yeah, a lot of coding will be like, to build some simple CRUD app, you can just go prompt to code, iterate like that. I think there'll be some things where there's like a mountain of tickets and bugs that companies may have. And it would be great to just have some AI coworker that can go through them, churn through them, and get them done. But I think there will also be these things that are super high value, and it's all about the taste of like this one individual. And maybe it won't look exactly like what an engineer looks like today. But I think that will be kind of what the future of engineering is. Just someone who's making like the judgments of like how the software kind of gets shaped, and it will probably be operating in some higher level.
And do you see that, I know you can't comment on this, but a couple of years from now, would you guys be having that AI coder that instead of paying $200,000, I pay $50,000?
We'd like to.
Is that sort of where you're going with this, or?
We'd like to build something like that, and we think it's going to look like a multitude of things. Like we think there's going to be something that lives in the background that is like a coworker. We'd like to be able to build that, and we think there's also going to be something that like is more in flow, that you are kind of in the loop, working with this much more closely at a much faster iteration speed. We'd like to build that as well.
Tell us a little bit about, one of the things that impresses me about, Cursor and, like a group of companies like you guys is just speed. Just speed. It's fast. Tell us a little bit about the culture, like what's important and how do you stay true to the mission, and
I think
bring it to life for us.
Yeah, the culture is like people that really care about the future of programming. Like the dinner tables, like the conversations are filled with like speculations about like, oh, what could we do if we, trained a model to do this and then it like acted in this way. And then you have like the UI people like talking with the model people and like kind of thinking through like what the future could look like. And it's just like a lot of that. And everyone gets super excited because there's just like so many cool things to build, to invent. And I think that's like probably like the essence of the culture of Cursor and what makes it work so well. It's like this curiosity where it's like, what is the next thing to build? What is the next killer feature? What is the way that we make Cursor much, much, much better than it is today? Because I think there's just like these things that are like right under our noses that no one's discovered yet.
Is Cursor 1% done or 10% done?
I think we're probably a bit more than 1%, but definitely less than 10%. I'd say 2 or 3.
That's amazing, actually. All right, cool. With that note, let's give Aman, thank you for joining us.